And coming in with what may again be the most impactful 1% in that or any other poll is Ralph Nader. He has the potential to once again influence the outcome of the presidential election, if for no other reason than he can. The New York Times reporting today that the third-party candidate is emerging as the threat that Democrats have been fearing. Polls showing he has the potential to swing the results in 9 battleground states: Colorado, Iowa, Maine, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Wisconsin, and, oh, by the way, Florida. Mr. Nader telling the newspaper that Senator Kerry would not make a good president anyway, quoting him, "He's not his own man because he takes the liberals for granted. He's allowing Bush to pull him in his direction. It doesn't show much for his character." Not what he said in May after meeting with the senator at Kerry campaign headquarters, calling the Democratic candidate then, quote, "very presidential." I spoke with Ralph Nader earlier this evening. Mr. Nader, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Keith.
Let me start with these quotations in today's article in the New York Times, which have you quoted as saying Mr. Kerry is not his own man and is taking liberals for granted. Those seem to be in some contrast to your praise of Senator Kerry in May when you called him very presidential. How do you reconcile the contrast?
Because the New York Times reporter in May said, "How did he look to you?" And I said, "He looked presidential." It was just an appearance question. I think John Kerry is surrounded by too many corporate campaign advisors, corporate campaign consultants, and corporate financiers. And he's basically taking the liberal votes for granted, in part because the liberals are not making any demand on him on labor, environment, civil rights, civil liberties, minority, anti-poverty issues. They're giving him a free ride because they're so freaked out by Bush. This allows the corporate interests to pull Kerry more and more in their direction. And one of the reasons why this race is so close is because on so many issues, whether it's no exit strategy from Iraq or Israel-Palestine or the Patriot Act or the bloated, redundant military budget or not doing anything about low-wage economy or universal health insurance now, the similarities are so great that it becomes a closer race. And what he's got to do is begin talking populist programs as if people mattered. He should be able to defeat Bush if he stands for a living wage and a real health insurance for all.
But as the Times article suggests, your candidacy can be very influential in 9 critical states, 10 if you get on the ballot in Ohio. But do you see any scenario in which that influence does anything except guarantee the re-election of President Bush?
No, because what isn't counted in the polls, Keith, is the extent to which we have been taking apart the Bush administration all over the country and getting some resonance with conservatives, an interesting margin of conservatives who are furious with Bush over the big government Patriot Act, over his coddling of communist China, over the sovereignty shredding impact of WTO and NAFTA, over Leave No Child Behind, which they interpret as federal regulation of local school districts, and, of course, deficits as far as the eye can see. It's amazing how the Democrats are not moving into that significant margin of the conservative vote. Well, we are.
The Zogby poll today, and that polls are not necessarily universally reliable, but it indicated that were you not in this race, that 41% of your support would be going to John Kerry, 15% to George Bush, 30% to other presidential candidates, and 13% would remain undecided. Do you, at this point, looking at this race realistically, inside the 3-week mark, do you think that the re-election of George Bush is the best realistic outcome of this election, and would you assume responsibility for it if it happens?
First of all, I want to defeat George W. Bush. I don't trust the Democrats, who have been losing for the last 10 years at the local, state, and national level to the worst Republicans, including losing an election in 2000. They actually won. So the Democrats, you can't get that through their head, that the polls are not the marker. The marker is the political dynamics before the polls, to the extent to which I'm helping to repress some of Bush's vote. I'm helping to push the Democrats toward opposing the military draft, for example. As our website, votenader.org, illustrates, issue after issue, we're presenting literally on a silver platter a few days ago to the Kerry Edwards headquarters on how we can beat Bush. The second is a more fascinating thing that Solon Simmons at the University of Wisconsin has is documented, is that unfortunately, because people want to be with winners, people who support the Nader-Camejo ticket, a good measure of them, when they go into that voting booth, they want to be with a winner, and they vote for Kerry. So it's not that simple, Keith. We're trying to get a deeper substance and a higher tone to the presidential campaign, dealing with the necessities of the American people, and focusing on how these two parties are turning our country into one-party dominated districts, stripping people of any semblance of an election. It's more like a coronation, because only the incumbent is going to win in these congressional and state legislative districts. That's important material.
You point out what you think the Democrats can't get through their heads. They would say you can't get through your head that the only possible outcome here is that you will tip the balance here, not towards defeating George Bush, but rather to merely re-electing him. Is that not a fact?
Easy rebuttal. Why haven't they been trying to scramble for the 100 million non-voters? Why have they not actively registered 9 million African-American voters, as Reverend Jackson has demanded that they do, 90% of whom would vote Democratic and the swing states? I mean, they are obsessed with scapegoating a small progressive effort to try to give people more voices and choices, and using dirty tricks and violating our civil liberties with hordes of Republican corporate law firms like Kirkland Ellis, Ken Starr's old law firm in Ohio. So, I mean, the whole story has not come out, Keith, and I'm glad you're giving me a chance to talk about it.
The fights that you want to fight on behalf of people in this context, in the electoral context, the fights you have spent your adult life fighting on behalf of people in consumer contexts, is fighting them now in this election worth the price of perhaps deciding this election one way or the other?
It's worth the price of breaking up the two-party system. It has to start somewhere. They have really betrayed the American people, turned Washington into corporate-occupied territory, with almost every department and agency controlled by corporate power. If Business Week magazine can say there's too much corporate power in America over government, consumers, environment, taxpayers, elections, I think at least one party should say the same thing.
Let me ask you finally, I just want to confirm something. I think I know the answer to this question, but I just want to confirm it. There is no chance that in the next 18 days you're going to withdraw from this campaign and endorse another candidate?
Less of a chance than George W. Bush or John Kerry quitting. We want to fight beyond November 2. This is a fight where often we have to lose and then fight and lose and then fight in order for the clean elections and addressing the necessities of American people prevail. It's worth it. It's worth every day of it, and we're trying to do this with millions of supporters and volunteers who are swelling our email list on votenader.org. They want change.